You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the show that talks to newsmakers and other important people from Nassau and Suffolk County that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week we'll have a conversation about issues that affect all of us. I live on Long Island just like you, and I want to know more about the people making the big decisions that affect all of us. Well, this week we'd like to focus on Election Day coming up this Tuesday and the races that you need to know about here in Nassau County. And I'd like to welcome back to our show Scott Eidler, who reports on Nassau County government and politics for Newsday and Newsday.com. Welcome back to this week's Long Island News, Scott. Thank you for having me. Well, thanks for spending the time. I know, this is crunch time, especially for journalists and following this. I guess I could just nicely call it a race, but a lot going on. Yes, we'll digest all of it. Very good, very good. Okay, so like I said, Election Day is Tuesday. Now, all 19 seats of the Nassau County Legislature are up for grabs. What's at stake and which races are the ones that you'll be watching? It's a very interesting year for the Nassau County Legislature. You've got Bruce Blakeman, the county executive. He's not up, but what's at stake is whether the legislature becomes even more Republican, whether they extend their majority. And if they get 13 votes, they would have a supermajority. Currently, the breakdown is 12-7. So they're very close. And if they have a supermajority, that means the Democrats basically have no say in government. They can't block bonds. They can't override vetoes. So this would be pretty key if the Republicans can flip a vote. The other interesting thing is that 4 incumbents are not running, they're retiring, and that there was a commission that redrew all the lines. So every 10 years, there's a redistricting. We got different map configurations. Some incumbents are nervous. They're running in different seats. Some of them don't even live in the district, so they might have to move. So it's a very interesting year, and it's going to affect the next 10 years. Yeah, gerrymandering has been a big issue that I've spoken to quite a few people about. And I know there was a place, I forget exactly where it is, someplace in the middle of the country, where Republicans basically have gerrymandered them into definite winning of elections for probably the next 10 years. Do we have any situations like that on Long Island? The Democrats believe that this is the case, that the Republicans overstepped here. It's interesting what's going to happen. There's a lawsuit being filed. Will the courts overturn this? Obviously, last year with the congressional elections, on the other side of things, the Republicans were successful. They thought that the state Democrats gerrymandered all the congressional districts, and they were thrown out at the last minute, and the districts were revised, and we have four Republican members of Congress on Long Island. So that was a big shock, and they had to get in a special master to redraw the lines. There's also litigation to try to say that wasn't fair, that the legislature should have had a second shot at it. So a lot is in play if the courts get involved. Yeah. Gerrymandering is a big issue, and nobody seems to address it at all. I'm holding two fingers up very close together, and I'm saying it's that far from being illegal. But it's been going on for 217 years, and nobody seems to want to change it. And yet we find ourselves in, can we draw districts that are basically fair? Is that possible? There is state law. There are federal laws about this, and New York passed one pretty recently. So that's where the challenge is on the Democratic side. It has to do with the number of majority-minority districts in Nassau County, and they feel that the way that different minority groups' votes were silenced based on the makeup of this map. So that's that, but that won't affect this year's elections. If there's a overturning, some people were upset that the Democrats waited too long. In January, the Republicans approved. It was earlier in the year that the Republicans approved the final maps, and they waited a long time to file a lawsuit. So it was too late in the game to overturn these maps, if at all.
So if that happens next year, the legislature would have to run on new maps in 2 years from now when people are already incumbents. So Republicans definitely have the momentum because they had the final say in these maps. There was a bipartisan commission, but the Republican-controlled legislature has to approve it. So the edge is with them in the creation of the maps, or whoever runs the majority.
Right. Okay. Well, also up for grabs are the people running the town governments across the county. Let's start first, the town of Oyster Bay, where incumbent Joseph Saladino is going up against newcomer Democrat Jared Baer. We had both of them on the show, and you can hear those interviews by searching for WHPC in this week's Long Island News, wherever you listen to podcasts. But what are the big issues in the town of Oyster Bay for the residents to consider?
In the town of Oyster Bay, Joe Saladino has had a pretty good grip on the town for the last number of years, very popular, and the Democrats have not been able to break in there for a very, very, very long time. Obviously, you had John Bendito there for decades, and there was a number of corruption scandals. He got tied up with former Nassau County executive Ed Mangano.
Right.
Bendito was acquitted, but there were a lot of corruption scandals in the town, other people arrested. So that was a big deal. But Joe Saladino has remained pretty popular, and the Democrats have not really run competitive races there. There's a big issue with the inspector general in the town recently that our colleagues have been reporting on. That people should be paying attention to about the way he ran that department.
Right. Well, moving on to the town of Hempstead now. Newcomer Democrat Alina Nix is taking on the incumbent Don Clavin for town supervisor. We had Ms. Nix on the show too, but Mr. Clavin declined the opportunity to join us to speak about his reelection. And again, that conversation with Ms. Nix is available on the WHPC app. You just click on the podcast button and find this week's Long Island News. But what's happening in Hempstead that we need to watch?
So Don Clavin, similar to Joe Saladino, very popular in his community. And one interesting thing to look at that Newsday is looking at very closely over the next year is what's going to happen with the Coliseum, whether Sands will get their zoning approvals for a casino. So that has to go through the town of Hempstead. The town of Hempstead has been quite mum on how they might handle this. They haven't offered any indication. We have not really been able to get interviews with Don Clavin, so they're pretty tight-lipped about it. But of course, they're controlled by Republicans. Nassau County is controlled by Republicans, so one would assume that they would work together to get this done, but it will have to go through zoning approval. The Sands, which has the casino license, will have to win zoning approvals through the town. In regards to the race, we know that in 2017, Democrat Laura Gillen became the first Democrat to become supervisor in more than a century. She was not reelected in 2019. Clavin defeated her. It was a very close race, but the Democrats have had a difficult time breaking in again. 2021, Clavin was widely reelected, and I believe the same is expected this year as well.
Right. Well, just a reminder, you're listening to this week's Long Island News on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and my guest today is Scott Eidler, who reports on Nassau County government and politics for Newsday and Newsday.com. Interesting that you say the thing about the Coliseum is, people don't readily realize that, but it's up to the town of Hempstead as far as zoning and things like that.
The next step in the process, it's a very long process. The state will ultimately have to approve it. There's gaming commissions and the governor's office is involved. But the first thing that happened was the lease was transferred from another developer who actually paid over $240 million, who received $240 million from Sands for the lease transfer. So the Nassau County Legislature approved it. The Planning Commission approved it. So that was the first hurdle. The second hurdle is zoning approvals from the town of Hempstead, but that doesn't mean it's a done deal. So that's just the next step. in the process for the casino. But ultimately, State Gaming Commission state approvals are needed for the casino license. But Sands currently has the lease to the Coliseum.
Right. There's a long storied history to the Nassau Coliseum, and I've spoken to some of the politicians who expressed the idea that we missed a golden opportunity there. We spent $25 to $30 million to redo the Coliseum. They put up some flashy aluminum stuff on the outside, and they actually diminished the number of seats in the arena itself, so it no longer became allowable to have National League hockey there.
Absolutely. That's completely accurate. Yes.
And it sounds like a plan. Oh my goodness. We don't have another. We're going to need a new arena. To me, I look at people are building arenas. This is today's version or way of getting public money into private pockets. Because there's a big transfer. I never get to see the books. I don't know where the money comes in, where it's actually coming from, and where it goes. And I don't think, look, most of the people out on the street that I know, if I ask them who their state senator is, they have no idea. So I know they don't know about this, but they have very strong opinions about it. We need a stadium. Really? I want to read that book about the progression of the Coliseum. And I don't know. I think Nassau County, I think we were hoodwinked. I really do.
We can team up on a book proposal for
right.
The Coliseum.
All I have is the questions. You'll have to have the answers.
Obviously, what happened was UPS Arena was built in Elmont, and a number of people are happy with that. And of course, a number of people are upset that the Coliseum doesn't have the capacity, even though it was remodeled and the Islanders came back from Brooklyn, couldn't go there. But there's the fans are still pretty angry about.
Yeah. And also the railroad was involved because of the extra stop that Elmont got. And initially it was just going to be open for games. It's like,
I was talking to someone who was saying, why can't the Islanders fans just appreciate the new arena? But it depends on where you live too.
That's true.
It's very accessible to people who live further east, and but there is the train station. So but I'm not as plugged into Islanders world as some of my colleagues.
Me either. But I got you. Now let's see. Now you've recently reported about political campaign ads targeting some Nassau and Suffolk candidates in the election. And these ads are being criticized as anti-Semitic because of images that fuel stereotypes of Jewish people. Can you tell us about the ads and how they've responded to the critiques?
Yes, I can. This was a very sensitive story that we worked on, my colleague Candace Ferretti and I, last week. So what happened was the Nassau Republicans are putting out a ton of mailers, more so than the Democrats, it seems. In the town of North Hempstead, we have John Kamen running for his old seat. Now, John Kamen was a supervisor in the town of North Hempstead for 10 years, a little more than that. And he left in 2013. He ran NIFA. He ran the Governor Cuomo storm recovery. Finally, the Republicans take back the town 2 years ago. Jen DeSena, who's actually a registered Democrat but ran under the party line, won the town. So the Republican committee does not want to lose that. They are putting a ton of money into that race, and they are bringing up a lot of old scandals of Kamen, or what they perceive as scandals. And they are accusing him of corruption, pay raises. So in some of these mailers, you're seeing picture of him holding fistfuls of cash.
Right.
Then you have Josh Lafazan, who a lot of people said was way more egregious. They put devil's horns over his head. They enlarged his features. They changed his face to look demonic, and also showed him with fistfuls of cash. And again, they're bringing up issues with whether he improperly received a loan, other things. And it's I would say it's a common way that politicians on both sides have tried to show politicians as greedy or corrupt.
Right.
What particularly is the problem is when you use this fistfuls of cash with Jewish candidates, whether they're holding the fistfuls of cash, and you're not doing it to Republican candidates. So anti-Semitism experts that we spoke to said the context really matters, but that this is a pretty old trope. And we found instances of it in a very well-done Washington Post article from a few years ago across the country. Chuck Schumer, Jewish candidates holding fistfuls of cash. Right. The old trope dates back to the 1890s, even medieval times, when there was French new anti-Semitic news publications showing Jews with exaggerated features, that they were a lot of them were in the usury business. They were lenders and they were corrupt. That was the anti-Semitic line back then. So using Jewish candidates holding the fistfuls of cash, changing their features, is really something that struck a chord with Long Island residents, and they reached out to us about it. And the Republicans were very defensive about this. They said they don't know the religion of their candidates, of the Democratic candidates, which a lot of people wrote in to say they found that hard to believe. John Kamen has been a supervisor for a very long time, appears at synagogues, Josh Lapizan as well. Interesting case in Suffolk County. We have a candidate from Centerport, was seen with cash under her. And they did this for about 6 to 7 candidates, not all Jewish candidates. So experts said that this was not as egregious as what happened in Nassau County with some of the Jewish candidates, because they did it. Still not a great look. A lot of people said they saw the pictures and they were very upset about them.
Yeah. Considering that, if you look at these things and you see that this is a trope from a long time, Republicans basically can't deny or just say, you could say we didn't mean that, but you can't say we didn't know what we were doing.
Right. They said that they did say they didn't mean that. They do not apologize, and they say this is completely taken out of context and that it's a very common thing for them to do, to use money in their images.
Right.
I come about that. Yeah.
I come from a time when if it looked bad, you didn't do it. No.
Yeah. One expert said you just don't use show candidates with cash in their hands. That's just
But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. I mean, even in politics, if it looks bad, nobody cares.
I think at the end of the day, we can look at all the ads. They're particularly nasty in both counties this year. There seem to be more frequent. The images, the alterations of people's faces. I mean, there's almost 24 for Josh Lapizan, changing the features of the face. And in Suffolk County, things accusing people of wanting abortion bans and a lot of negativity in these flyers that are coming to people's homes.
Yeah, we had John Kamen, I'm sorry. And one of the things he did say, he raised taxes 44%. And John Kamen basically says, they've been using that number for the last 30 years. Every time they put an ad about me, it's 44%. He goes, I don't even know where they got the number. But that's what, it's one of these things where, we have politicians who will repeat things 3 and 4 times. And as I see that happen, I just think there's another guy that read Mein Kampf. The way to get people to, blindly follow, if they hear it enough, eventually it's like Chinese water torture, one little drop at a time, but keep the drops coming, and eventually people will echo those sentiments.
There's definitely a saturation approach with the different political parties. So with both parties, with John Kamen, that's very common. You see Dave Colon in Suffolk claiming Ed Romaine has raised taxes 8 years in a row. For towns, that's what they do. They raise taxes by the tax cap. School districts do it. It's 2 or 3%. I'm not justifying it. People would love to see their taxes come down, but to keep up with salaries, they do raise taxes 2 or 3%. The town of Hempstead, Kate Murray has done that for many years in the past. So it's common on both sides of the aisle to use that as a political cudgel, as you will, is not exactly, for many people's opinion, honest, because all the towns do it. Yeah. You see town officials give themselves raises. They sometimes do it after they win elections. Yeah. People just do it when you think it's warranted, so you don't have to do these major hikes years later. Yeah. So everyone's guilty of it. They have budgets. But the real issue with taxes, of course, is the school districts. They're 2/3. You have salaries and pensions and healthcare. So towns that raise taxes 2%, 3%, then it's 44%.
Yeah, right.
Add them all together. One interesting thing I thought of was that if you look at these ads, they are about money. They're about taxes. And the last 2 years were about cashless bail. You're not seeing as much of that in these local races. They're all focused on, did this person take a bribe? Did this person take a raise? Did this person raise your taxes? Mm-hmm. So I did think that was interesting. I do think, of course, there are some of the cashless bail, the migrant fear-mongering going on from both parties, the abortion fear-mongering, that this person will do worse than they actually plan to do is the message. But I do feel that all the races are a little bit sleepier than the last couple of years. There's less the cashless bail, not that it's not an issue, but you're not seeing it as much in the marketing. You're seeing a lot of financial taxpayer issues.
Right. Everybody can get on the train of taxes are too high. So that's an easy, kind of an easy bit. Yeah. Again, you're listening to this week's Long Island News on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and my guest today is Scott Eidler, who reports on Nassau County government and politics for Newsday and Newsday.com. And in speaking about this, I did kind of skip the town of North Hempstead, but you mentioned it.
That's the hottest race in a lot of people's mind.
Yeah. Well, Jen DeSena said she's going to cut taxes 10%. John Kamen also made a point when he came on. We spoke to him and he talked about, they said I gave myself a raise. I didn't hear Jen complaining about that because she is now receiving that amount of money.
Yes, exactly. They're they really kind of have to take these political hits, the raises, so the next person can get them and keep up with the cost of living.
Right.
And not the raises, but that's an interesting thing we see. The county executives don't take their raises until after they win elections. Some people just say they should just be automatic, and so they don't have to have these sensitive votes.
And pandering to the uneducated. People who don't understand that, look, a town is going to raise its taxes 2% every year. That's not necessarily anybody. That's, a condition of running a town.
Right. If they're not raising taxes, that means they're dipping into reserves. And if they have too many reserves, then they've overtaxed in the first place. So it's very complicated, the tax situation.
Oh, yeah. And we also have the constant reassessment situation on Long Island, which everybody says they want to attack it and make it, and Laura Curran tried. She got lambasted left and right for it. I don't know if she did it right, did it wrong. I don't know what the right way is. I don't know what the wrong way is. But it's definitely not balanced. It doesn't make sense. A guy living in a little house is paying a lot of money. A guy living in a big house isn't paying so much. How does that happen? And then we've got the companies that promise to give you, help with getting your taxes lowered. And you may save $200, $300, and that winds up being the cost that the company asks you for. So whether you're paying into the tax base or paying a private company, it's basically the same thing Can
I give you a quick update on early voting?
Please, go.
I actually pulled some numbers this morning. In Suffolk County, there are more Democrats than Republicans that have turned out through Thursday. There's a few more days left of early voting. 9,023 Democrats, 7,857 Republicans, and about 4,000 or so non-registered voters. So Democrats have had a strong showing, but in Nassau County, it's the opposite, which is unusual. The Republicans have about 400 more early voters than Democrats, so a little more than 11,000. And then we've got about 4,300 voters not registered with a political party, the so-called independents. So that's not a great sign for Democrats in Nassau County. There are a little bit rumblings about it. So that's a little bit of a forecast, because Republicans usually turn out more so on election day than Democrats. Some people think they have better organization, ground game. Right, so that's a little bit of a tea leaf that you can read.
Interesting.
And but the big numbers are going to come over the weekends. That's when most people vote. So this will be the second early voting weekend, and it's through Sunday. So
right.
I did it yesterday. It's very easy. You missed the big lines on Tuesday, so we'll have to see the numbers.
Yeah. But anyway, in the time that we have left, I thought there are some stories. Now, you've had a story about the Nassau County Legislature unanimously approved County Executive Bruce Blakeman's $4.1 billion budget last week for 2024. Any details about the budget that we should know? And did they raise our taxes?
They kept the property tax levy stable. But of course, when you don't raise the tax levy, that means the county is collecting less revenue. So there are hidden things that they have to do. They might have to raise parks fees. They might have to raise the red light camera fees. And of course, if you do it too frequently, then in a couple of years from now, they could have if there's a recession, sales taxes dip, then they run into a problem. They might have to raise taxes again. So places like NIFA, the Nassau Interim Finance Authority, are very cautious of measures where recurring sources of revenue are not, if they do something to alter the revenue stream. So they don't have an issue with this keeping taxes stable. The Democrats proposed a $128 million property tax levy, and actually the Republicans and Bruce Blakeman's administration basically said, no, we can't sustain that. So there was a big political fight about it on Monday.
That's right. So when a politician comes out and says, I'm going to freeze taxes, that's not necessarily a good thing, because you're kicking the can down the road, so to speak.
Possibly. If there's a really good year where they have more sales tax than they anticipated, then they can justify it. But if it's not responsible, where they slash it too much, then you could cause a problem in future years. You will always, what we've seen is that there's a tax cut generally in an election year, and there are all these budgeting tricks that can happen. Right. But we're always cautious about using terms like tax cut. They cut the property tax levy, so it's less. The amount that they're collecting in revenue should equate to a couple $100 less for the average resident, but taxes are affected by your assessment, whether you put an addition on your home, a million different things. And the school tax is the biggest portion. And school districts are not really cutting their taxes.
Yeah, no. My guest today has been Scott Eidler, who reports on Nassau County government and politics for Newsday and Newsday.com. Thank you for taking the time. But the clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to get on out of here. I'm Bill McIntyre. Remember, you can listen to us by searching for this week's Long Island News wherever you listen to podcasts. And we're right here every Friday on the radio at 3 p.m. on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.